Lily opened her eyes while the sky was still a dark, heavy gray. The small mountain town of Eureka Springs, Arkansas, was completely quiet at this hour. She did not have a watch to tell the exact time, but she knew the rhythm of the streets perfectly. It was far too early for the shopkeepers to open their doors or for the tourists to walk down the stone pathways. Most people were still asleep in their warm, soft beds behind locked doors. Lily rubbed her arms to chase away the chill. The cold morning air always managed to find its way through the gaps in the wooden shed where she slept. She reached for her coat, which was a faded green color and 5 sizes too big for her 6-year-old frame. Someone had left it near a clothing donation bin 3 months ago, and Lily had claimed it. It was bulky and smelled like old dust, but it kept the wind from biting her skin. Slowly, she stood up and began her morning routine. She carefully folded the large piece of cardboard that served as her mattress and tucked it deep behind 2 rusted metal oil drums in the corner of the alley. If a city worker found it, they would throw it away as trash, and she would be forced to sleep on the bare, damp ground the next night. Her stomach let out a low, empty growl. She had not eaten a proper meal in 2 days. The day before, she had found a small piece of a soft pretzel near the public water fountain. But it had not been enough to stop the hunger. Today, she needed to find something better before the streets became crowded with people who would tell her to move along. She walked out of the alley and stepped onto the sidewalk. She preferred this specific time of day because the town felt like it belonged to her. No one yelled at her to get away from their storefronts, and no one threatened to call the local police. She could walk openly, looking up at the historic brick buildings and the large trees without trying to hide her face. She directed her steps toward a small bakery near the middle of the street. Sometimes the workers threw away the unsold bread from the night before in large plastic bags by the back door. When she arrived, she saw that the back steps were completely clean. The trash bins were locked tightly with a metal bar. Lily sighed and moved further down the narrow passage behind the commercial buildings. She reached a large green dumpster that belonged to a hardware store. She stood on her tiptoes and peered over the metal edge. The top bags contained nothing but torn paper and plastic wrap. She reached her small hand inside, moving a heavy pile of discarded carpet remnants to the side. Her fingers brushed against something solid and remarkably cold. It was not plastic or wood, it was metal. Lily gripped the cold object and pulled with all the strength in her small arms. The object resisted at first, caught under a heavy wooden plank. She shifted her weight, dragged the plank away, and pulled again. With a loud clatter, the object slid out of the dumpster and landed on the gravel path. Lily stared at it, her eyes widening in pure surprise. It was a bicycle. The frame was small, designed specifically for a young child. The original blue paint was peeling away in thick flakes, revealing large patches of dark red rust underneath. The seat was torn open in the back, allowing the yellow foam padding to stick out like a small sponge. The black rubber tires were completely flat, and the metal chain was hanging loose, covered in a thick layer of dry grease and dirt. Despite the damage, it was a complete bicycle. It had 2 pedals, 2 handlebars with black plastic grips, and a small metal frame. Lily reached out and touched the handlebars. She had never owned a single toy in her entire life. Sometimes she found broken pieces of things in the park. A plastic wheel from a toy car, a doll with no hair, or a single green puzzle piece. But she had never found something whole. This bicycle belonged to no one else now. It was entirely hers. She gripped the handles and tried to push it forward. The wheels gave a sharp, metallic screech that echoed loudly against the brick walls of the alley. The rusty metal parts resisted her movement, but with a firm push, the wheels turned. She began to guide the heavy frame down the sidewalk, heading toward the large park at the edge of the town. The walk to the park was difficult. Eureka Springs was built on steep hills, and Lily had to stop every few minutes to catch her breath. The flat tires made the bicycle heavy to push, and the loose chain kept clicking against the metal guard. Her small boots slipped on the damp leaves that covered the concrete walkway. During one of her breaks, she sat on the curb and used her hands to turn the pedals. They moved slowly, making a grinding sound, but they did not break. Lily smiled so wide that her cheeks began to ache. She imagined what it would be like to ride the bike down the smooth paths of the park. She pictured herself moving fast, the cool wind blowing through her tangled brown hair. She thought that if the other children saw her with a bicycle, they might ask her to play. They would not see a child from the streets. They would see a regular girl with a toy. Gideon sat on a stone bench beneath the wide branches of an old oak tree in the quietest section of the park. He had been sitting in the exact same position for more than 2 hours, completely motionless. His skin was remarkably white, resembling smooth, polished stone, and his hair was the color of fresh winter snow, falling in straight lines across his forehead. He wore a simple black wool coat that protected him from the morning dampness. To anyone walking past, he appeared to be a wealthy young man in his early 30s enjoying the morning air. In reality, Gideon was a king of shadows, a vampire who had lived through 5 centuries of human history. He had wealth that could buy entire cities, stored in hidden vaults and modern bank accounts across the globe. But his heart felt completely empty. He watched the morning sun rise over the hills, casting long, pale shadows across the green grass. The bright light did not hurt his eyes, but it reminded him of the endless passage of time. He had traveled the world, built businesses, and accumulated vast amounts of money. Yet he felt a deep, persistent loneliness that none of his riches could cure. His long life felt like a quiet room where nothing ever changed. He had no family, no companion, and no purpose other than to exist from one century to the next. The town of Eureka Springs was supposed to be a temporary resting place, a quiet spot where he could hide from the noise of the modern world. The silence of the park was interrupted by a harsh, grinding noise. Gideon turned his head slightly, his sharp senses instantly tracking the sound. A small girl was walking up the gravel path, pushing a rusted blue bicycle. She looked incredibly small against the backdrop of the large oak trees. Her green coat was covered in dirt, and her face was smudged with black grease from the bicycle chain. Gideon stayed perfectly still. Usually, humans could sense that he was different, a creature of the night, and they kept their distance. Children especially tended to look away from his pale face and silver-gray eyes. The girl did not look away. She stopped pushing the bicycle when she was about 10 feet from his bench. She wiped her forehead with her sleeve, leaving another streak of black grease across her skin. She looked at his white hair, then at his pale hands, and finally at his face. Her gaze was direct and entirely free of fear. She seemed to notice the quietness surrounding him. Lily took a deep breath and pushed the noisy bicycle closer until the front wheel touched the edge of the stone bench. "Hello," Lily said. Her voice was thin and dry from the cold morning air. Gideon blinked slowly. "Hello," he replied. His voice was smooth and low, like the sound of a cello in a quiet room. Lily shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She looked down at her boots, then back at Gideon. "I found this in the big green box behind the store," she said, pointing a small finger at the rusted blue frame. "It has all the parts, but it keeps falling over when I try to get on it." Gideon looked at the bicycle. He could see that the frame was bent, the tires were useless, and the chain was dry. "The machine is old," he said gently. "It requires a great deal of work to move properly." "I know," Lily said. She looked across the open lawn of the park. A few regular families were beginning to arrive. A father in a bright jacket was holding the back of a brand-new red bicycle, running alongside a small boy who was laughing loudly. Lily watched them for a long time without moving. Then she turned back to Gideon. "All children have a dad who teaches them how to balance," she said. She looked directly into his silver eyes. "Can you be my dad, just for today?" Gideon felt a sudden, strange movement in his chest. His heart had not beaten in hundreds of years, but the words felt like a physical touch. He looked at the girl's thin face, her dirty coat, and the hope in her eyes. He had the power to move mountains and the wealth to buy everything in the town. But no one had ever asked him for something so simple and so significant. He stood up from the bench, his tall figure casting a long shadow on the grass. "Yes," Gideon said, stepping toward the rusted bicycle. "I can be your dad for today." Gideon knelt on the damp grass next to the blue bicycle, ignoring the moisture that soaked into his black trousers. He examined the metal chain that was jammed tightly between the gear and the frame. He reached out with his white hands and gripped the rusted metal. Lily watched him closely, her eyes fixed on his fingers. With a small, controlled exertion of his strength, Gideon freed the chain and snapped it back onto the teeth of the gear. The metal gave a loud pop, but it sat perfectly in place. He used a piece of cloth from his pocket to wipe away the thickest layers of dry grease and dirt from the pedals. "Try to sit on the seat," Gideon instructed. His voice was calm and steady. Lily nodded quickly. She gripped the black rubber handles and lifted her right leg, swinging it over the frame with some difficulty. The torn foam of the seat scratched against her coat, but she managed to settle herself into place. Her boots could barely touch the pedals, and she had to stretch her arms completely straight to hold the handlebars. The bicycle tilted instantly to the left, but before it could hit the ground, Gideon's large hand caught the frame. He held the metal steady, his grip as solid as an iron vise. Lily gasped, then smiled when she realized she was not going to fall. "I am holding the bicycle," Gideon said, placing his other hand gently against her back. "You will not fall. Keep your feet on the pedals." "Your hands are very cold," Lily noted, though she did not pull away. "Like ice." "They are always cold," Gideon replied, "but they are strong. Now, look straight ahead at the path. Do not look down at the wheels. The bicycle will go where your eyes are looking." Lily gripped the handles tighter, her knuckles turning white. She pressed her right foot down on the stiff pedal. The bicycle moved forward a few inches with a dull creak. The chain turned, and the wheels rotated slowly against the concrete path. Gideon walked beside her, matching her slow pace perfectly. His hand remained firmly on the back of the seat, absorbing every tilt and wobble before the bicycle could lose its balance. "Keep going," Gideon said. "Press the other pedal." Lily pushed her left foot down. The bicycle gained a little bit of speed. The flat tires made a heavy thumping sound against the ground, but the momentum helped her stay upright. Gideon continued to walk next to her, his long legs moving effortlessly. He watched the intense concentration on her small face. She was biting her lower lip, her eyes fixed entirely on the gravel path ahead. They moved past a row of rose bushes and turned a slow corner near the park fountain. "I am moving," Lily shouted, her voice rising with excitement. "Look, I am riding it." "You are doing very well," Gideon said. He slowly lessened the pressure of his hand on the seat, allowing her to feel the natural balance of the machine. The bicycle wobbled significantly, and Lily let out a small cry of fear, but Gideon instantly tightened his grip to stabilize her. "I have you," he reminded her. "We will try again." They spent the next hour moving up and down the flat path near the oak trees. With every attempt, Lily became less rigid. She learned how to use her weight to keep the frame straight, and she began to understand how to turn the handlebars gently rather than jerking them to the side. Gideon stayed beside her the entire time, running when she pedaled faster and holding the frame whenever she needed to stop. He felt a strange sense of pride developing within him. He had watched empires rise and fall, but watching this small child complete a single successful circle on a ruined bicycle felt more important than any historical event he had witnessed. The morning sun moved higher into the sky, warming the park and burning away the early mist. Lily finally stopped pedaling and slid off the torn seat, landing heavily on the grass. Her legs were visibly shaking from the physical effort, and her breath was coming in quick gasps. A sudden loud growl came from her stomach, echoing in the quiet space between them. Lily dropped her head, her face turning a deep shade of red as she looked at her dirty boots. Gideon looked down at her. He did not require human food, but he understood the signs of physical exhaustion and hunger. He could see that her wrists were thin, and her coat hung loosely over her shoulders. "You have worked hard," he said. "It is time to eat." Lily looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and doubt. "I don't have any money," she said quietly. "The shops don't give food away." Gideon reached into his coat and produced a small wallet made of black leather. He opened it, revealing several crisp green bills. "I have enough for both of us," he said. He reached down and picked up the rusted blue bicycle with one hand, lifting it effortlessly by the frame. "We will go to the cafe across the street." Lily stood up quickly, wiping her hands on her coat. She followed Gideon as he walked out of the park gates. He carried the heavy bicycle over his shoulder as if it were made of balsa wood. They crossed the street and approached a small diner with large glass windows and red vinyl booths inside. A sign on the door read "Open." When Gideon pushed the door open, a small brass bell rang clearly. The waitress behind the counter looked up, her expression changing from a polite smile to confusion as she saw a pale, elegant gentleman carrying a piece of scrap metal, followed by a child covered in alley grease. Gideon ignored the woman's gaze. He selected a large booth in the far corner, away from the other patrons, and carefully leaned the blue bicycle against the wooden wall. He waited for Lily to slide into the booth before he sat down across from her. The waitress walked over slowly, holding 2 paper menus. "We would like a large plate of pancakes with butter," Gideon said before the woman could speak. "A side of scrambled eggs, 4 pieces of bacon, and a large glass of orange juice." He looked at Lily. "Would you like anything else?" "A chocolate milkshake," Lily asked in a small whisper. "And a large chocolate milkshake," Gideon added, looking at the waitress. "Bring a pot of black coffee for me." The waitress took the menus and walked away quickly. Within 15 minutes, the food was placed on the table. Lily stared at the steaming stack of pancakes as if it were a collection of gold coins. She picked up her fork with trembling fingers and cut a large piece. She ate slowly at first, savoring the taste, but as the hunger took over, she began to eat faster. Gideon watched her in silence, occasionally pushing the glass of orange juice closer to her hand so she would not choke. He took small sips of his black coffee, the bitter liquid serving as a prop to maintain the appearance of a normal human lunch. By the time the sun began to drop behind the hills, the plate was completely clean. Lily had finished every piece of bacon and drained the milkshake glass to the bottom. She leaned back against the red vinyl seat, her face clean of grease where she had used her napkin. She looked out the window at the sky, which was turning a soft shade of orange. Her expression grew quiet and solemn. "The day is almost over," Lily said, her voice dropping. "I have to take my bike back to the shed now." Gideon set his coffee cup down on the saucer with a small click. He looked at her small hands and her clean face. The thought of her returning to a cold wooden shed with a cardboard bed was unacceptable to him. "No," Gideon said firmly, "you are not going back to the alley." Lily looked at him, confused. "But that's where my spot is. If I'm not there, someone else might take the big pieces of cardboard." Gideon stood up and placed a large bill on the table, far exceeding the cost of the food. He reached for the bicycle frame. "You are coming with me to my house, Lily. I promise to be your dad for today. And the day does not end until you have a safe place to sleep." Gideon walked through the iron gates of his estate at the northern edge of the town, carrying the blue bicycle over his right shoulder. Lily walked beside him, her small hand gripping the fabric of his coat. The driveway was long and lined with smooth gray stones that crunched under her boots. At the top of the hill stood a large house built from dark stone and thick panels of glass. It looked like a modern fortress, surrounded by ancient pine trees that blocked the view from the road below. The windows were dark, reflecting the orange and purple colors of the sunset. Gideon unlocked the heavy wooden front door and stepped into the entrance hall. The air inside was warm and carried the faint scent of old paper, polished wood, and dried flowers. He set the blue bicycle down gently against a stone pillar. Lily stepped onto the heated marble floor, her boots leaving small, damp tracks behind her. She looked up at the high ceiling and the large paintings that hung on the walls. The house was completely silent, but it did not feel cold. "You may take off your coat," Gideon said, removing his own wool garment and hanging it on a wooden peg. Lily unbuttoned her green coat slowly. Without the bulky fabric, she looked even smaller. Her shirt was thin and had a small tear near the shoulder. She stood near the door, her hands tucked behind her back, afraid to move further into the room. "It's very big," she whispered. "Do you live here all by yourself?" "I do," Gideon said. "For a long time I preferred the silence. But tonight it is your home, too. Come this way." He led her down a wide hallway to a large bathroom. The room was lined with green tiles, and a deep porcelain tub sat in the center. Gideon turned the brass handles, and hot water began to pour into the tub, sending up a thick cloud of white steam. He walked to a linen closet and brought out a thick white towel and a bar of soap that smelled like lavender. He placed them on a stool near the water. "The water is hot," Gideon said. "Take as much time as you need to wash away the dirt from the park. I will be in the kitchen preparing the guest room." Lily walked to the edge of the tub and dipped her hand into the water. She let out a small laugh. "It's like a swimming pool," she said. "A warm one." Gideon left the room and closed the door gently. While Lily was in the bath, he left the house through the back door and moved into the town with the supernatural speed that belonged to his kind. Within 10 minutes, he had visited a small clothing shop on Main Street. The owner was a man who owed Gideon a great favor from many years ago. Gideon selected several items: a soft red woolen dress, thick cotton socks, sturdy leather shoes, and a heavy winter jacket. He left a stack of bills on the counter and returned to the estate before the water in the tub had even begun to cool. He placed the new clothes on the bed in the room next to his own. The room had blue curtains, a large oak dresser, and a bed with a thick down comforter. When Lily emerged from the bathroom, her hair was damp and combed straight, and her skin was a healthy pink color from the heat. She saw the red dress on the bed and stopped. "Are those for me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "They are yours," Gideon said. "Put them on and then come down to the kitchen. I have prepared something else for you." Lily picked up the dress as if it were made of glass. She pulled it over her head, the thick wool instantly driving away the remaining chill in her body. She put on the white socks and the new leather shoes, which fit her feet perfectly. She walked down the stairs, her new shoes making a firm, solid sound on the wood. Gideon was waiting in the kitchen. On the counter sat a glass jar filled with large chocolate chip cookies and a small blue mug filled with warm milk mixed with cocoa. "You may have as many cookies as you like," Gideon said, pointing to the jar. "You do not need to ask for permission in this house." Lily took a cookie from the jar and bit into it. The chocolate was sweet and soft. She took a sip of the warm cocoa, closing her eyes as she swallowed. She looked at Gideon, who was standing near the window, his white hair catching the reflection of the moon outside. "Thank you, Dad," she said quietly. Gideon looked at her for a long moment. Hearing the word again in the quiet of his own home felt different. It was no longer a temporary arrangement made in a park. It felt like a decision that had already been written into the stone of the house. "You are welcome, Lily," he said. "Go to bed when you are finished. The room is safe." Lily woke up when the first light of dawn began to stream through the blue curtains of her room. She lay perfectly still under the heavy comforter, her eyes moving around the unfamiliar space. The walls were painted a soft white, and the oak dresser stood solid against the far wall. In the corner, her rusted blue bicycle was leaning against the baseboard, exactly where Gideon had placed it the night before. She reached her hand out from under the blanket, feeling the soft texture of the sheets. It had not been a dream. She was still in the large stone house on the hill. She slid out of bed, her bare feet touching the warm wooden floor. She walked to the door and opened it a crack, listening for any sound. The house was quiet, save for the distant hum of a refrigerator. Lily tiptoed down the long hallway, her heart beating a little faster. On the street, she had learned that adults could change their minds quickly. A shopkeeper who gave her a cookie one day might yell at her to get away the next. She wanted to see if Gideon was still the same man from the park. She followed the faint smell of roasted coffee beans down to the kitchen. Gideon was standing by the stove, his back to her. He was dressed in a clean white shirt and dark trousers, his white hair perfectly neat. He was stirring a small iron skillet. As if he had eyes in the back of his head, he spoke before she could even step into the room. "Good morning, Lily," Gideon said, turning to face her with a calm expression. "Did you sleep without interruption?" Lily nodded, holding the edge of the doorframe. "The bed is very soft," she said. "I didn't hear any noises." "There are no wild animals or passing trucks here," Gideon said, lifting the skillet from the heat. "I have made breakfast. Sit at the table." Lily sat in a large wooden chair. Gideon placed a plate in front of her, containing 2 scrambled eggs, 2 thick slices of toasted bread with yellow butter, and a glass of fresh apple juice. He sat across from her with a single white porcelain cup filled with black coffee. Lily picked up her fork and began to eat, her eyes never leaving his face. She wanted to see if he looked tired or if he regretted letting her stay. Gideon remained perfectly calm, taking occasional sips of his drink. "I must perform some work today," Gideon said after she had finished her eggs. "I have an office at the end of the hall. I will be inside for several hours, but I am not leaving the house. If you require anything, you may walk down the hall and knock on the door. Do you understand?" Lily lowered her head. "Am I allowed to stay in the living room?" Gideon stood up and walked to a wooden cabinet near the dining table. He opened a drawer and produced a large notebook with clean white pages and a cardboard cover. Next to it, he placed a rectangular tin box. He brought them to the table and set them in front of her. Lily reached out and opened the tin box. Inside were 24 colored pencils, each one perfectly sharpened and arranged by shade, from bright red to deep purple. "These are for you," Gideon said. "You may use the paper to draw whatever you like. There are cookies in the jar on the counter if you become hungry before midday." Lily touched the smooth wood of a green pencil. "What if I use all the paper?" "Then I will purchase another notebook," Gideon replied simply. "Do not worry about using the supplies. They belong to you now." He paused near the kitchen door, his gray eyes fixing on hers. "Welcome to your home, Lily." He walked down the hallway, and a few moments later, Lily heard the heavy oak door of his office click shut. She was completely alone in the large kitchen. She took a deep breath, the smell of butter and coffee making her feel safe. She picked up the notebook and the tin box of pencils, carrying them carefully into the grand living room. She sat on the long leather sofa, spreading the blank pages across her lap. She selected a red pencil and drew a large square in the center of the page. She added a triangle for a roof and 2 small squares for windows. In front of the house, she drew a tall figure with white hair and a small figure in a red dress. She spent the next 3 hours coloring the sky a bright, solid blue and filling the lawn with green grass. The house was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence. Every few minutes, she could hear the distant sound of Gideon typing on his computer or moving a chair in his office. The small noises reminded her that she was no longer alone in the world. The moon was high in the sky when the nightmare arrived. Lily was back in the alley behind the hardware store. The rain was pouring down in thick, heavy sheets, soaking through her green coat and turning her cardboard bed into soft, useless mush. The wind was howling between the brick walls, and she could hear loud, angry voices coming from the main street. She was crying, her small hands scratching at the locked door of the bakery, begging for someone to let her inside where it was warm. No one answered. The water kept rising around her boots, freezing her feet until she could no longer move. Lily woke up with a sharp gasp, her chest heaving as she pulled herself upright on the leather sofa. She had fallen asleep there after dinner, refusing to go to the bedroom because she wanted to be near the hallway. The living room was dark, lit only by the pale light of the moon coming through the large glass windows. She was trembling violently, her forehead covered in cold sweat. The fear was so thick in her throat that she could not make a sound. She slid off the sofa and ran to the corner where her rusted blue bicycle stood. She threw her small arms around the metal handlebars, pressing her face against the cold iron frame. She began to sob quietly, her shoulders shaking as the memory of the cold alley filled her mind. She believed that the house was gone, that Gideon had left her while she was asleep, and that she would be forced to return to the shed as soon as the sun came up. A soft rustle of fabric broke the silence of the room. Lily did not hear any footsteps, but suddenly a tall shadow appeared beside the sofa. Gideon was kneeling on the rug next to her, his white hair catching the silver moonlight. He did not touch her immediately. He simply waited for her to notice his presence. "Lily," he said, his voice lower than usual, like a whisper in the dark. "The storm is not real. You are inside the house." Lily looked up, her face wet with tears. I dreamed I was back in the box," she sobbed, her fingers gripping the rusted bicycle tighter. "The water was coming in, and you weren't there. Everyone leaves me. No one stays in the alley." Gideon reached out his long white hand and placed it gently on her shoulder. His grip was steady and anchoring her to the floor. "I am here," he said. "I have lived for 500 years, Lily. I do not change my mind, and I do not move from my home. You are not going back to the alley." Lily leaned her head against his arm, her small body still shaking from the aftershocks of the dream. "Were you ever scared when you were little?" she asked between small breaths. "Did you have a box?" Gideon looked out the large window at the dark pine trees. "I did not have a box," he said quietly, "but I lived in a very old stone building in Europe after my family was taken by a fever. I was 4 years old. There were 20 other children in the room, and we slept on straw mats on the floor. Every month, people would come to look at us, choosing the strongest boys to work in the fields or the kitchens. They never chose me because I was too pale and too quiet. Lily stopped crying, her eyes fixing on his face. Did you stay there forever? I stayed for 2 years, Gideon said, his hand continuing to rub her shoulder in a slow, rhythmic circle. I watched every other child leave. I believed that I was broken, that there was something wrong with my face or my voice that made people turn away. I spent the nights staring at the stone ceiling, wondering if anyone would ever want to take me home. What happened? Lily asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. An older man named Thomas came to the building, Gideon said, a small, distant memory softening his gray eyes. He was a carpenter. He did not want a servant to work. He wanted a son because his wife had passed away. He looked at the corner where I was hiding, walked past all the other boys, and reached out his hand to me. He told me that he had been searching for me for a long time. Lily reached out her small hand and touched Gideon's cold fingers. Did he teach you things? He taught me how to work with wood, Gideon said. He built me a small bed from pine boards that smelled like the forest. He held my hand when the nightmares came, just as I am holding yours tonight. The fear does not disappear in one day, Lily. It takes time. But I will be here every night until the bad dreams stop coming. Lily pulled herself closer to him, her fingers letting go of the rusted bicycle handlebars to grip his white hand instead. The coldness of his skin no longer bothered her. It felt like the solid, unchanging stone of the house. She closed her eyes, her breathing slowing down as the safety of the room replaced the terror of the alley. Gideon remained kneeling on the floor beside her, his silver eyes watching the dark forest outside, keeping guard over her sleep until the morning light returned. Gideon stood by the kitchen window, holding a piece of heavy white parchment in his hands. It was a formal document from the state government, covered in official stamps and signatures. It had been 3 weeks since the social worker had visited the estate, and the legal process was finally complete. He had spent thousands of dollars on specialized attorneys to expedite the paperwork, ensuring that no technicality could delay the decision. He walked into the living room, where Lily was sitting on the rug, arranging her colored pencils by size. Her hair was clean and tied back with a small red ribbon, and she looked healthy and bright in her woolen dress. Gideon knelt down beside her, placing the document on the coffee table. "Lily," he said, waiting for her to look up from her pencils. "The man from the court called my office this morning. The papers are finished." Lily tensed slightly, her small fingers freezing around a yellow pencil. "Does that mean the lady is coming back to take me?" Gideon smiled, a genuine expression that cleared the coldness from his pale face. He reached out and held both of her small hands in his. "No one is coming to take you. The judge has signed the final paper. Your name is now Lily Evans. You are officially my daughter, and I am your father. We are a family now, legally and forever." Lily stared at him for a few seconds, her large brown eyes blinking as she processed the words. Then a massive smile broke across her face, stretching from ear to ear. She dropped the yellow pencil and threw herself forward, wrapping her arms tightly around Gideon's neck. She began to cry, but her small face was filled with pure relief. "I can stay," she whispered into his shoulder. "Forever and ever?" "Forever and ever," Gideon confirmed, holding her small frame against his chest. He felt a deep sense of peace settle into his ancient bones. For 5 centuries he had traveled the world as a predator, a king with no land and no people. Now he had a home, and he had a daughter to protect. "We are going to celebrate today. Put on your leather shoes." "How are we going to celebrate?" Lily asked, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. "We are going back to the diner with the red booths," Gideon said. "You may order the largest hamburger and another chocolate milkshake. And after that, I have a surprise for you at the center of the town." An hour later, they were walking down the main street of Eureka Springs. The autumn sun was bright, turning the leaves of the maple trees into shades of gold and red. Lily walked proudly beside Gideon, her small hand securely locked in his. She no longer looked down at the sidewalk or tried to hide under a massive coat. She looked up at the tourists and the shopkeepers, her head held high. When they entered the diner, the brass bell rang loudly. The same waitress from the first day smiled when she saw them, directing them immediately to the large corner booth by the window. Lily sat down and looked out at the street, watching the cars pass by. For the first time in her life, she was on the inside of the glass, looking out at the cold world from a place of perfect warmth. She ate her lunch with a slow, deliberate joy, laughing whenever Gideon used his napkin to clean a spot of ketchup from her nose. After they had finished their meal, Gideon led her down the street to a large store with a sign that read Eureka Springs Cycle Shop. Through the glass windows, Lily could see dozens of bicycles arranged in long rows. There were mountain bikes with thick tires, racing bikes with curved handles, and small children's bikes with baskets and colorful bells. The shopkeeper, an older man with glasses, walked over and nodded politely to Gideon. "Choose any bicycle you like, Lily," Gideon said, pointing to the rows of gleaming metal. "This is your celebration gift. It will be completely new, and it will belong to no one but you." Lily walked slowly down the aisle, her shoes clicking on the polished concrete floor. She looked at a pink bicycle with white streamers on the handles, then at a bright purple one with silver stars painted on the frame. She stopped at the very back of the store, where a simple, light blue bicycle was parked. It had a woven wicker basket on the front and a small silver bell attached to the right handlebar. She reached out and touched the smooth, unblemished blue paint. "This one," Lily said, turning to look at Gideon. "I like this one because it's the color of the sky on a sunny day." Gideon nodded to the shopkeeper, who immediately pulled the blue bicycle out and adjusted the seat to match Lily's height. She climbed onto the seat, her boots resting perfectly on the black plastic pedals. She reached out her right thumb and pressed the lever of the silver bell. It gave a loud, crystal-clear ding that echoed through the entire shop. Lily laughed, a bright musical sound that made Gideon's heart feel lighter than it had in centuries. "We will take it," Gideon said, handing his black leather wallet to the shopkeeper, "and a black helmet to match." They walked back to the park as the sun began to sink below the western hills, painting the sky in deep shades of pink and orange. Gideon carried the black helmet in his hand, while Lily pushed her brand-new blue bicycle along the gravel path. The wheels did not make a single screeching sound. They rolled smoothly over the stones with a quiet, satisfying hum. They reached the large flat lawn beneath the old oak trees, the exact spot where they had met 3 weeks prior. Lily buckled the black helmet under her chin and climbed onto the blue seat. She looked at the smooth asphalt path ahead, then turned her head to look at Gideon. There was no fear in her eyes tonight, no anxiety about falling or being left behind. She knew that the tall man with the white hair would never move from her side. "I don't need you to hold the seat the whole time today, Dad," Lily said, her voice full of confidence. "Just give me a little push at the start." Gideon smiled and placed his large, pale hand against the back of the blue seat. He felt the solid strength of the new metal frame. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I'm ready," Lily said, gripping the handles firmly. Gideon gave the bicycle a gentle, steady push, using just enough strength to send her forward into the smooth path. Lily pressed her feet down on the pedals, her legs moving in a perfect, even rhythm. The blue bicycle moved forward cleanly, cutting through the long shadows cast by the setting sun. She did not wobble, and she did not look down at her feet. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, a look of pure, unadulterated joy spreading across her face. "Look, Dad!" she shouted, her voice echoing across the empty park. "I'm doing it all by myself. I'm not falling. I see you, Lily," Gideon called back, standing under the wide branches of the oak tree. He clapped his hands together, his gray eyes tracking her movement with intense pride. He watched her complete a perfect wide circle around the stone fountain and head back toward him, the silver bell on her handlebar ringing continuously as she laughed in the wind. An elderly woman walking a small brown dog stopped on the grass nearby, watching Lily ride her bicycle with so much energy. She looked at Gideon, noticing his white hair and his pale, elegant features. She gave him a warm, friendly smile. "What a beautiful little girl," the woman said softly. "She has a wonderful laugh. Is she your daughter?" Gideon looked at Lily, who was currently waving at him with one hand while keeping the bicycle perfectly straight with the other. The sunlight caught the blue paint of the frame, making it sparkle against the green grass. He felt the final remnants of his 500 years of loneliness melt away into the evening air. "Yes," Gideon replied to the woman, his voice firm and filled with a quiet certainty. "She is my daughter." The sun dropped completely behind the mountains, leaving the park in a soft twilight shadow. Lily brought the blue bicycle to a smooth stop right in front of the stone bench, sliding off the seat with an easy grace. She walked over to Gideon and took his hand, her small fingers warm against his cold skin. "I'm tired now, Dad," she said, leaning her head against his coat. "Can we go home?" Gideon picked up the new blue bicycle with one hand, his fingers gripping the metal frame securely. He looked down at her clean, happy face and squeezed her small hand with his other. "Yes, Lily," he said gently as they turned toward the gates of the estate. "Let us go home." I look down at Lily as she walks beside me, her small hand resting securely within my own, and for the first time in 5 centuries the future does not look like an endless expanse of empty shadows. I spent hundreds of years moving through the human world as a ghost, collecting wealth and watching generations pass away like leaves in the autumn wind. I believed that my immortality was a stone wall, separating me from the warmth of human connection forever. I thought that the quietness of my large house was the only peace I would ever find. Now, as we walk up the hill toward the stone house, I realize that the true meaning of my long life was simply waiting for this specific child to find a broken bicycle in a dumpster. My strength was not meant for building financial systems or surviving wars. It was meant to hold the seat of a blue bicycle steady until a scared little girl learned how to balance. My wealth was not meant to sit in dark vaults. It was meant to purchase hot meals, red wool dresses, and boxes of sharpened colored pencils. I see the years ahead of us clearly now. There will be more mornings filled with the smell of coffee and scrambled eggs, more afternoons spent running down the park paths, and more evenings spent reading stories in the warm light of the living room. Lily will grow taller, her small boots will be replaced by regular shoes, and she will eventually ride her bicycle down the hills of this town without looking back to see if I am there. But she will always know that the stone house on the hill is her home, and that her father is waiting for her behind the door. The red-blue paint of her new bicycle shines softly in the moonlight as I lean it against the front porch railing. It is no longer just a toy. It is the anchor that brought 2 completely lost souls together in the middle of a quiet mountain town. I am a king of shadows, a creature of the night, but tonight I am simply a father, taking his daughter inside to sleep in a warm, safe bed. As I turn the key in the heavy wooden lock and step into the hall, I know that the darkness outside has no power over the warmth we have built within these walls. We have found our family, and that is all that matters.